Thank you all for joining here today, and thanks a lot to SPE for organizing this hackathon. We are really happy from our side, from GEOS, to take part and to supply the data set for the challenge, and really excited to see all the solutions you're gonna come up with as participants. So today I'm going to talk about geothermal reservoirs, but focus on sandstone reservoirs, and why mineralogy is so important to be able to quantify. And yeah, I have worked on this producing this data set together with Ninge Køhlen, also from GEOS, which is the Geological Survey of Denmark and Greenland. And Nikolai has also assisted with designing this whole process. And so I'm gonna move straight to an overview of geothermal energy technologies that are currently being used, and this overview is made by the European Geothermal Energy Council. And showing then here, can you see my mouse?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. So yeah, showing here then there are some very shallow technologies for like single buildings, and there can also be used for like heating, bathing areas, etc. And then geothermal is largely used for district heating and also for cooling, where you dig deeper into the ground. And then it can be combined with some other technologies like the lithium extraction of the geothermal fluid when you have it on ground, and also potentially with the CO2 storage as is going on in some places. And then geothermal can also be used for electricity generation, either if you drill really deep into hot rocks, or if you are in a volcanic area where the rocks are very hot right at the surface. So I'm going to show here the case for district heating, which is what is mostly used in Europe and also in Denmark. So the formation water from a deep sandstone reservoir is pumped up to the surface through a production well. And then the heat is transferred to the district heating network by heat exchangers. And you can also use heat pumps to get the heat further up. And then the cooled water is then returned into the reservoir. And that must then occur at a certain distance in the reservoir. And then extraction of this geothermal energy during winter can then be combined with the heat storage in the summer, such that surplus of other types of energy, such as sun and wind in Denmark, they are not wasted. Yes, and just to show this shallow solution with geothermal heat pumps, so that is something completely different because where the deep geothermal energy is produced from constant radioactive decays in the earth in the core of the earth. Then this builds on the solar radiation and just taking up the very shallow heat here for individual buildings, where you can have these closed loops with a liquid, and it can either be placed here 1 meter underground or a few hundred meter steps. And an overview of parts of Europe here to show that most projects, they use reservoirs between 60 and 80 degrees heat. And that is then primarily for the residential commercial buildings and also for horticultures like greenhouses. And increasingly also there's been attention now to applying it for process heating, like drying of foods, beer production, etc. Yeah, you can see in some areas where they have this high geothermal gradients due to volcanic areas in Italy and Turkey and also in Iceland, etc. That then they can, even from shallow reservoirs, use directly for electricity production. And then many countries, including Denmark, are working on some legislative changes to better enable geothermal exploitations, because not all the rules are really fitting for this new type of technologies. So in Denmark, yeah, in many cities we already have this district heating networks, and we need an alternative to replace coal as a heat source. And then geothermal can be exploited from sandstone reservoirs from about 1 to 3 kilometers depth in Denmark, and then used for heating. And the upper limit of 1 kilometer, that is because at shallower depth it's not hot enough to supply sufficient heat for a district heating network. And below about 3 kilometers, the sandstones became too tight. There are too little pore space between the sand grains, so there's cannot flow enough warm water through the rock. But this exact depth, it varies a lot, and that's also what this hackathon assignment can help explaining why, because that is really due to which minerals that has precipitated between the grains in the sandstones, which varies greatly. So the temperature, it increases with about 25 to 30 kilometers or degrees per kilometer in Denmark, and then plus 8 degrees at the surface. And the resource, it's really huge. I mean, we have made a calculation that it's about the available resource about 3 times as large as the amount of energy that Denmark has gained from oil and gas production. So it's really a lot, and it can potentially cover up to 50 degrees of the Danish district heating in hundreds of years. Of course, it's not, it's only makes sense to apply it where you really have a large heating demand at the surface, or cooling. It's also increasingly used for cooling, especially in more hot places. So we largely know where the resource is present in the subsurface due to some publicly funded research projects we have carried out. And here is an overview of Denmark, as I will use an example in this talk. And the suitable reservoirs are present across most of the areas. You can see here in the green, light green, where there's 1 reservoir, and dark green where there are 2. This is of course a rough overview. If you want to drill in a certain place, you need to do some more seismic analysis, for example. And the porosity and permeability of the reservoir they vary greatly, and that is due to the differential burial depths and burial histories of these sandstones, meaning that different amounts of minerals have formed between the grains. So many geological and geophysical disciplines, methods are combined then to map the distribution and also the reservoir properties of all the sandstone reservoirs. And these include, for example, seismic, wireline logs, sedimentology of the cores, and sequence stratigraphy, biostratigraphy to make age dating of the sandstones, and to combine them between wells, correlate them, and then burial history and core analysis. We measure the pore fluid composition when possible, and then look at the mineralogy like petrography and diagenesis and provenance. And diagenesis is the process by which a sand transforms into sandstone at burial because of the elevated temperatures. So all these minerals start precipitating between the grains, and others dissolve. So this is one of the plants in Denmark, geothermal plants. This one was built in 1984, so first in Denmark. And it has run very smoothly ever since. And there's only been a very slight decrease in injection pressure, which would also be expected over so many years. So they have drilled a new well also to increase the capacity here 4 years ago. And then one of the other plants is the Margrethe plant in Copenhagen. As you can see, yeah, it takes up very limited space. So it's also a good energy form in larger cities. And here are the building with heat exchangers and filters. And then the injection well is over here and production well here. So in this case, the wells are deviated and are over 1 kilometer between them in the reservoir. Yeah, and this is an example made by Martin Media from Aarhus University, showing like when you have an injection here of the cold water and the production well here, about 800 meters away. It will actually take a very long time before the cold front, it reaches the production well in this simulation. And that is also what we have seen in the existing plants. So it really has potentially a very long lifetime, such a geothermal plant. And when the cold front hits, it's also like a very slow motion. Yes. And here an overview of the geothermal plants we have in Denmark, currently 3, and next year there's going to be built a new in this Aarhus, second largest city in Denmark. And so up here is the Thisted plant, produces this 44 degrees hot water from the Gasum reservoir at about 1.2 kilometers depth. Yes, and when you then look at the Margrethe plant, it's much hotter water because it has been drilled to a deeper reservoir lying below the Gasum, which is the Bund reservoir, at 2.6 kilometers depth. And then the last plant is again at this shallow Gasum, although in some places the Gasum can also be very deep due to this differential burial. And however, for these 2 plants, there have been challenges with injecting the cooled formation water back into the reservoir. And that has mostly been technical issues, also with like showing that you need some certain amount of experience. And you know, when we have built so few plants in Denmark, then we didn't know much perhaps about exactly how to design everything. But I think we have really learned a lot from this. And here is the database we have across Denmark. So most of these wells scattered across here have been drilled for oil and gas exploration many years ago. And luckily, we still have all the material and well logs left. So it can now be applied for looking at the geothermal reservoirs, and also the same reservoirs can also be applicable for CO2 storage that we are now looking a lot of also. And the seismic data, it's very scattered in some areas like down here because there's a rather shallow basement, only 1 kilometer deep in these areas. Whereas there's a large basin area here in the middle and to the south. Yeah, and the data is a very varying quality, as you can see. And from the wells, then we have the petrophysical logs that we then have interpreted to get an idea of which intervals, you know, we have the sandstones in the reservoir, and what the properties are, and then compared to when we have drilled cores from the wells, then we have taken this plug out and measured porosity permeability, and then made thin sections such that we can quantify the mineralogy and look in microscope, etc. And for those sections that have not been caught. We have this cuttings that is completely chopped up rock you get out of the well. So it at least also can give some information. So this is an interpretation of a seismic line here across northern central part of Denmark, where you can see here, this is in two-way travel time, but largely corresponding to depths in kilometers. And as you can see, the subsurface, it's really challenging. There's a lot of faulting that has been going on. There are some salt diapir movements that have affected the layers in some areas. And then there's this shallow basement in some areas. And there's been tilting of this block folding, etc. So the reservoirs we're looking at, that is mostly the Triassic here, the orange, and then the Jurassic, the green here. And they are present at the very different depths and thicknesses in different parts of the basin. Yeah. And therefore, when we look at the burial histories, they really are very different from the different parts of the area. And here are some examples. So here is the time. So these sandstones were deposited about 210 million years ago. And then, for example, if we take this pink Tistel well, which is where this geothermal plant is located, then you can see how this sandstone, it was buried a little in the beginning, then it was a long time where nothing happened, and then it was buried quite quickly here from about 100 million ago and onwards, and then there was some time where nothing happened, and then there was some uplift here during the Neogene or recent period here, because there's been elevation of the whole area and erosion, and so soil overburden has been removed. And for regards to reservoir properties, this is not critical for this Tistel well, but looking at, for example, the deepest one, the Ors, you can see how it has been down to depths of 3.6 kilometers. And that is really, that corresponds to such high temperatures that a lot of diagenesis going on, so a lot of precipitation between the sand range. So that can really damage a reservoir totally. So the present day boreal depth of a sandstone is not enough to know. You also need to know something about if it has been buried at larger temperatures back in time, because that can really have affected the reservoir properties. And this is like the boreal anomaly we have across Denmark, showing how much overburden thickness has been removed at this uplift during the past 20 million years. This is estimate is based on then vitrinite reflectance data combined with apatite fission track analysis, sonic velocity, stratigraphic and seismic data. So this is like an overview, but of course also varying locally. So moving on to the reservoir quality, it depends on of course the thickness of the sandstone layers, and on how fast the fluid can flow through. So the flow speed, the permeability, it depends on the size of the pores, so the porosity, and whether the pores are connected. And the type of cement that then precipitates between the sand grains greatly affect how much the permeability is reduced. For example, here you can see how this clay cement is really making it hard for the pore fluid to flow through the rock. Whereas when you look at quartz cement, which is what we will be in this hackathon assignment, then it has some reduction in permeability, but the amount of reduction, it really depends on how deep it has been buried, because the amount of quartz overgrowth that forms, it depends directly on the temperature and on how long time the sediment has been buried at high temperature. So these overgrowth, they just grow larger or thicker and thicker until at last the pores are completely removed and just filled with quartz. So I'll use then the Gassum Formation as an example, probably the best sandstone reservoirs in Denmark. So in most of the formation, there are high porosity and permeabilities. And there's an overall increase in diagenesis with an increasing depth, but much variation occurs. And this due to a combination of factors, including the provenance, that is where the sediment comes from, then the depositional environment, whether it has been deposited in a river or at the coastline or something else, and then the texture, like the grain size, sorting, etc., the mineralogy, and then this burial history. So the combined effect of all these factors could then be estimated by diagenesis modeling to enable better pre-drill predictions of reservoir properties in areas where we don't have any information of the subsurface. And here are some, you can see all the data we have of porosity and permeability from the Gassum Formation. And here you can see some SEM images, which is scanning electron microscopy images, which is what you're gonna be looking at in this hackathon. So to the right, you can see here there are a lot of black areas, which are the pores between the grains. And this corresponds to a high porosity and permeability, whereas from this well, there are very few and small pores left due to very enhanced diagenesis and also corresponding to a large depth here. And this is just the same data set you just saw before. I've just highlighted 2 wells, which were unsuccessful, and that they were drilled before this maximum burial effects on diagenesis were considered, like before they thought about how the deeper burial of the sediments back many years ago has affected the reservoir properties. So the Orset well was drilled here in 1979 to a depth of 3.3 kilometers. But they didn't know that the sediments had actually been buried much deeper, maybe to about as much as 4 kilometers depth before uplift, which is really critical for the reservoir quality because that will enhance quartz overgrowth and other processes a lot. So they found really poor reservoir quality. Then a few years later, they wanted to drill another well in the same area. So they chose a spot where the Gassum Formation were 400 meters less deeply buried and thought, then it must be okay. But this this place, it has always also been buried deeper, and it was even another type of sand. It was deposited at a coastline, which also decreases reservoir quality. So it really, again, gave very poor reservoir quality. And these wells were you know, they want to use it for geothermal. So it was really sad that it didn't work. But at least now we have learned a lot from this and know much more about where not to drill now. So the influence of these depositional environments on diagenesis is going to go through here. So this is an example for the lagoonal sandstones in the Gassum Formation. And then for fine versus medium grain sandstones. So this is our results from a number of samples from these different depths. And you can see generally that medium grain sandstones, they have better reservoir quality than the finer grain sandstones. And we look at the very shallow sand here from 1 to 2 kilometers. It is actually not a sandstone yet. It's only like loose sand with rare cement between the grains. And then when you go deeper to 2 to 3 kilometers, and you can see now for here on the quartz grain, there has begun growing some quartz overgrowth. Also here, a small one on this. And then here there is another type of grain, and then there's been formed some carbonate cement. And when you go deeper down to then 3 to 4 kilometers, that is where it really begins to grow fast, all these different mineral precipitations, and really beginning to close the pore space a lot. So increasing temperature, that's really the importance here. So this is the kind of environment that the sediments were deposited in. So the sand was supplied from mountains in the back and flowing in rivers to the coast. And so there are both been deposited sand here in the rivers and along the coast and in lagoons, etc. And then when you have a cross section of this, you can see how the coastline has moved back and forth. And that is sequence stratigraphy then that is used to interpret this and combined with like biostratigraphic data. And then it's possible with all these data to make these paleogeographical reconstructions. And this is then for a selected time slice where we have like in all these wells, you can see we have data from this specific time of the Gasm formation. And by this, we can then interpret, for example, that all the red, that is all the river deposits that were being deposited at this time. And then the coastline here in the yellow, it moved back and forth about in this area and deposited sandstone and some lagoons. And then off here, it was like the offshore deep environment. Yeah, so we have made these from a lot of different time slices in the Gasm formation with the paleogeographic reconstructions here. This showing a time when there was a large part of the area that was just flooded. And the deposition environments then affect the reservoirs both by the distribution of the sandstones and their thickness, and also the grain size, which is, for example, generally much larger in the fluvial, here the rivers, than in the shore face sandstones. And then it's also important for the clay content and for which mineralogy that is being deposited. It also depends on where the rivers came from, so which kind of rocks were eroded and supplied the sediment. And this is sequence stratigraphic interpretations between some of the wells, showing how, for example, here at Thisted, there is a thick sandstone reservoir here with fluvial estuarine sandstones. As you go further out in the basin, the reservoir consists of a lot of smaller shoreface units. And then going further to the southeast, you again get some thicker sandstones because sediment was supplied from different parts of the basin hinterlands. Yeah, and here are some mineral maps. And the one to the right corresponds partly to some of those that you're going to look at in the hackathon assignment, showing a very quartz-rich sandstone. And this one has only been buried to about 2 kilometers depth, so there's still a lot of these black pore spaces between the grains. And then there are a few feldspar grains and some clay in some areas, some carbonate. Whereas when you look at the sediment from the western part of Denmark in the formation, it has much more feldspar content of various composition in these feldspars, also showing that the sediment came from a different sediment source area. And this is what we have been looked at in provenance analysis, where we also made radiometric age staging of some of the heavy minerals grains in the sand, and thereby been able to see exactly which basement areas that the sediment has been supplied from. So this feldspar-rich sandstones, it comes from a local source where it has not had much time to become much mature, whereas the quartz-rich sandstones down here, they have been supplied from a combination of this further northern source in the Norwegian mountains, and also from the Vrisken source here in Central Europe, which has mixed and produced this very quartz-rich sediment. And for such a sediment, then it's really important to be able to quantify the amount of quartz overgrowth that will form during burial. So, and as I also mentioned before, the grain size is also important for the reservoir quality. Here you can see again the data from gas information, and they have been grouped into how coarse the sediment is, and showing that the coarser the sediment, the larger the permeability will be. So that is something you also have to take into account when you make this diagenesis modeling. And again, the same data set, but only including those samples where we have quantified the mineralogy by looking at what is the most reservoir quality reducing factor on the mineralogy. For example, all these yellow spots, that is quartz cement that has grown. And you can see that even rather small amounts of quartz cement can be really very bad for the reservoir quality. So it's important to be able to quantify this quite accurately. And then in this, for the diagenesis modeling, we use this Touchstone software where there is a lot of cementation models included, like for this quartz cementation. So you need to have some knowledge of your quartz grains. For example, if they are monocrystalline, then they will grow faster, or they will grow some larger shapes of the overgrowth. Whereas if the grain consists of many small crystals, then it will also, the overgrowth will be smaller. Yeah. So for this diagenesis modeling, we use the data we have of petrography. I mean, that is mineralogy, and then the core analysis, the porosity and permeability, and then the burial histories over here. And then we analyzed it in the Touchstone software to make a forward diagenesis modeling of the evolution in reservoir quality through time. And for each sample with the petrographical data, then we can model the diagenetic development and reservoir qualities and simulate it in relation to temperature and the effective stress histories. And then when obtaining an acceptable match by sensitivity testing and optimization, then the model can be used to estimate the reservoir properties in areas without well control. And we have then made a diagenesis model for each of the different depositional environments, like the fluvial, the shore phase, and others. The models can then be extended by the TMAP software, for example, and the 3D basin modeling. We have used Petromod here. And then they can be extended onto maps. So we use our information here from the phases maps to model then for here the permeability at this specific time slide. And these pre-drill estimates can be really important then to estimate the reservoir properties in prospect areas when you have no nearby well data. So again, an example from this time slice. You can see the porosity and permeability estimates and how the difference in the different deposition environments, it really affects the reservoir properties. And for example, how much quartz that precipitates with depth. And that is, of course, also very much related to the temperature. So this can be combined in this model. And these are some of the other minerals that form in the sandstones. Some examples. And this is an example from one of these transgressive events where most of this basin were flooded. So good reservoir sandstones were only deposited along the edges of the basin. So yeah, conclusion here is that mineralogy really matters to be able to estimate the reservoir quality of these geothermal reservoirs. So knowledge of the mineral composition, provenance, deposition, and burial history can then be integrated to predict the type and amount of diagenesis and how it affects reservoir properties, and then avoid drilling tight sandstones. And then knowledge of the mineralogy and also brine composition can also be used to prevent clogging and corrosion and precipitation during production of the geothermal plants by taking the necessary precautions. And here just showing how the gas information, it was deposited and then buried. And you can see a very differential burial across the basin. Now it went really fast. And then here in the end, there was some uplift of the whole basin and how that affects permeability in this particular sandstone interval. Good. So now I'm just gonna go briefly through the hackathon assignment, and then this Friday, Ninke Kolen, she is gonna tell this in much more detail. So we have made this data set on our scanning electron microscope, which has a combination of detectors that can produce these signals seen here. Where for the assignment, we use these mineral maps made by this Mineralogic size software. And you can also, you should use this, the cathodoluminescence CL images, and also the backscattered electron BSE images. And all this information must be combined in order to make the assignment. So images for the hackathon then, we have selected some very quartz-rich sandstones for this assignment to produce a data set that is good to work with. And we have then here the BSE, which really shows the material contrast. So what you can see is here are the sand grains with their overgrowth, and you cannot really see where is the grain and where is the overgrowth, but you can see where the porosity is. So there's still some open pores here. And whereas when you look at the CL, it shows the mineral growth information. So here you can see the original outline of the original sand grain, and then what is on the outside here is the overgrowth. And you can see how all the overgrowth, they have similar colors, whereas the original sand grains here and here and here, they can have very different grayscale colors. And they can also have some internal structures. And then you have these mineral maps also from these same intervals. And this is coarser resolution because it takes so long time to measure the mineralogy in each of these spots. But it's just to give you information that this is actually a quartz grain here and here and here and here. And again, showing here the pore space, and that there are a few other minerals in some places. So another example, again here from this quartz-rich sandstone. So here the original quartz grain, and here the quartz overgrowth, and here the open pore space. And the open pores, they are generally much easier to see in the BSE images, which is why it would probably be very helpful for you to combine these images for the assignment. So step 1 would then be to combine. Here you can see an example here where we have done it ourselves, and these images are slightly offset, which always happens in an SEM because it's different detectors that measure these different images. So first step would be to make a way to combine them. And yeah, again, you can see when you look here, it's easy to see the difference between the mineral and pore. When you look at the CL, you can see the difference between the grain and overgrowth. And when you look at combined, it's easy to see all three of these. So for the step 2, then you trace the boundaries on the images and find a way to do this automatic. And here we have done it by hand just to show you what we mean. So here you can see the traced on CL image, which is the original quartz grain, and what has been traced on the BSE image is the quartz overgrowth. And for step 3, you can then calculate the areas of the different phases by here taking the traced image and checking that it's actually all quartz, all the minerals you're looking at. And then, yeah, you can, the ultimate goal would be to calculate the areas of overgrowth versus original quartz grain versus pores versus a bit of other phases. Yes, but Ninge will really explain more about this on Friday. Yeah, and delivery at the end of the hackathon, well, Mike already talked about this, but yeah, this calculated areas and then Python codes that show how you perform the task, and then made into a report and a video, as has been explained. So thanks for your attention now, and just showing also a scanning electron, but a 3D image of how these quartz overgrowth look like on the sandstones when they have not grown so large yet. Whereas when you have clays growing in the reservoir, it's really very bad for the sandstone or the reservoir quality.